Now we'll talk about this. International Labour Organization Director General Gilbert Houngbo has urged global policymakers to prioritize decent work, labor rights and inclusive growth as central goals of economic strategy. Speaking at the IMF-World Bank Spring Meetings, he warned that youth unemployment, informality and gender disparities threaten global stability. He actually criticized fragmented policy approaches and called for integrated, employment-focused macroeconomic strategies. And I mean, this is a better time to talk about issues around labor, even as we celebrate Happy Workers' Day. So we have a lawyer and a public affairs analyst, Liborous Oshoma, join us for the conversation. Thank you so much, Liborous, for coming around.
Thank you, my pleasure.
So let's start this way.
And Happy Workers' Day.
Of course. Thank you very much. Now, we start this way. Should decent work and labor rights be treated as core economic objectives alongside growth and stability?
That, please. I didn't get the question. Can you come again?
Just okay, so I asked. All right. So I said, should decent work and labor rights, which are part of what is being discussed globally, be treated as core economic objectives alongside when you talk about growth and stability in the country?
Yes, Secretary. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you can't be talking about economic stability, talking about labor rights without talking about wages, or talking about development without also talking about rights. I think the right of workers should form a fundamental objective and directive principles of state policy also. It should be a right, fundamental, objective of government. If you say the essence of government is the security and welfare of the people, you should be able to drive down welfare and security, because it is the workforce actually that makes up the government, really, because there is no government without workforce. So, but when the rights are just relegated and hanging in the balance, for example, you have fundamental rights, you have directive principles of state policies, and yet labor rights are just subsumed in labor laws, and in some cases they are more observed in breach. So certainly you're going to have this kind of topsy-turvy development indices. Fortunately, I'm even attending a regional development retreat currently, and these are some of the issues also that are up for interrogation. And I completely agree that it shouldn't be, like I said yesterday at the fora, it shouldn't just be about any time, we're discussing Labor Day or Workers' Day, and then this issue just, come up, and then we throw out, some of these policies and requests out there, and after that, nothing is, talked about it. We'll just leave it again until, the next year. And then you find out that even some of these laws also, the harmonizing, the practice, it becomes, a very difficult one, especially, in a country like Nigeria, where you have, a behemoth federal government, and then you have state governments that, are just barely managing to cope, and then subsume under, that, overriding brotherhood of the federal government. And that's why you find out that most of the rights of the laborers at the state level, and then we're not even talking about the private sector. We talk about minimum wages for labor, which are also not obeyed, under the private sector. So what should be the ILO? I think there should be more collaboration, more sanctions, apart from just these policies and requests, from member countries.
All right. Now, I'd like to, now that you've actually talked about how it affects government roles, I'd like to bring this into perspective. Now, is prioritizing decent work and labor rights feasible in capitalist economies where profit-driven policies often seem to overshadow social considerations?
Yes, it is feasible. It is feasible because the two ordinarily, go pari passu. Profitable consideration, decent wages, and then prioritizing the welfare of those people who made this, profit feasible. But a situation where it is only profit that is driving, the process in the capitalist economy, then the fundamental objective, like I said, the fundamental objective of government is nebulous: welfare and security. And the indices for determining those welfare is not properly spelled out. In cases where they are spelled out, they are subsumed in not the GROM law, but in another law. Then it becomes a very difficult one. I give you an example. We always take China, we take Japan, for example. You look at the population, you also they operate a model like ours, and then a one-party state, Mali. But you find out that the province, why the federal, creates the platform and opportunity and an environment to ensure that businesses, the rules of engagement for businesses. The province are more particular, they are more, welfare driven for the people to ensure that even when they work, there is a fair treatment, especially for the private sector.
Okay.
But that's not the same model here. The private sector here is more profit oriented, and because also there are no jobs.
Okay.
So in the absence of jobs here, to now begin to talk about fair wages, where there is lack, becomes a problem.
Yeah, sorry to, but I'd like you to just hold that thought right there, all right? We need to quickly go on a very short break. When we return, you have to continue with that summation and tie it around other social issues. Thank you. So even as the world celebrates Happy Workers' Day, and of course economic discussions span the globe, now the ILO is calling for decent work and labor rights to be further entrenched in discussions and policy formulations so that workers all over the world can actually have a decent life and of course a fantastic environment to work in, whether or not that fantastic environment can be achieved. We've been talking to a lawyer and of course a public affairs analyst, Liborous Oshoma, who has been sharing his thoughts with us. Liborous, thank you so much for your patience. Earlier on you were talking about balancing capitalism with welfareism. I'd like you to conclude on that thoughts.
Yes, so you find out that in an environment where there is scarcity, the owners of the employer now observe the rules in breach, and so especially where the rules, the law or consequences are not as strong, they are not as strong. So the little jobs that are available, you find out that the welfare of the worker takes second fiddle. And then the workers themselves, a situation where some persons are, elevated above others, and because of, mind you, scarcity here, because of the positions, you find out that those people who are supposed to also take care of the welfare of their colleagues, become part of the employers who at the end of the day, would, breach these rules. That's why it's not just enough to discuss all of these things on paper. There should be concerted efforts. There should be intentionality in ensuring that, there is regional development. There is also the framework to ensure that employment is intentionally created. Any workforce that does not make the creation of employment, a fundamental objective. Any government that does not make creation of employment, decent employment, a fundamental objective, certainly you are going to have that disparity between welfareism and capitalism. Both can go pari passu if we make it, we intentionally create an opportunity for jobs creation. But unfortunately, that's not what is happening. Look at what China is doing.
Okay.
Certainty, there's that effort to ensure that jobs are created through industrialization, through technology advancement. But here, that's not the situation here. So what we have is a situation where, the government is really not, concerned about, how to create jobs. Whether they want to relinquish that responsibility to the private sector or relinquish it to the state government, there's a confusion, there's a divorce. So until that is harmonized, and that's why I come back to the ILO. What are the sanctions in situations where countries can provide jobs? Because there is this tendency to always run away, which we call Japan here. So the ILO just issues these sanctions, these policies, and then it ends in rhetorics and there are no sanctions. Unlike FIFA, So that's the difference.
Okay, so you've talked about regional differences or disparities. Let's narrow it down to gender disparity and look at it from the angle of women and youth unemployment that is said to be a threat to global stability. Are those issues also part of the ones you mentioned, or there are some fundamentals that actually fuel inequality? And if so, what policy changes should be put on board or brought on board to actually deal with this perceived marginalization?
So let's look at it. For example, we'll talk about gender equality, and then we'll say 25% of jobs should be reserved for women. ILO standards, World United Nations standards. Even in some cases here, we say government positions, portfolios, 25% ministries should be headed by women. It just becomes a slogan, or it becomes just a campaign material, a tool. And this rule had consistently been breached. There are no sanctions. So the only way you can drive effective, labor practice that will engender equality, whether youth and women and every sector, is to ensure that, like I said, make it a fundamental objective of governance, a fundamental objective of government, and knowing fully well that the ILO, not just to overseas, but there are also to a very large extent sanctions that each country will face, and there are collaborative, platforms to ensure that development is driven. And when those platforms are there, it becomes easy, and that will create enough, will reduce scarcity and create enough opportunities.
All right. So earlier on, you talked about the possibility of job creation along gender and regional lines, but then there's also the fear of advancement in technology, particularly AI. So in your own experience, is the vision for employment-focused macroeconomic strategies compatible with the growing influence that we have seen in artificial intelligence, which could actually disrupt traditional job creation models?
Because you see, this debate has been ongoing. The creation of artificial intelligence and whether it will destroy job creation. The world is dynamic, and it's only diversification that can save man. Because as the technology increases, there's this fear that technology will someday take over the job of men. But what technology had come to do is actually to enhance this job. A situation where before now you need to go learn, study something. Artificial intelligence makes it easy for you to, you go to university to learn. Artificial intelligence makes it easy for you to operate, a machine that we agree 25 persons can operate. One person can just sit down and operate it. What it means is that those 25 persons will not just be out of job. They will have to diversify their skill into areas that are needed. So this idea of all of us insisting that we must all remain in one place, artificial intelligence helps to expand the scope. So, but I do not believe that it is taking the job of man, but it helps to expand the scope so that man begins to look for other areas where they can conquer. There are certain things that AI cannot do. You will still need man to operate those machines. You will still need man to be able to deliver on those artificial intelligence. So, but what's the problem? The challenge here is that, man has become so laid back in some areas, especially in developing countries. Okay. That's why they call it developing countries. As well as even some of these regional blocks. You find out that even the need to create the framework to improve on, not just AI now, to even improve on job creation for the man itself. Well, before you talk of AI, it's not there. They are not there.
Well, one would hope, one would actually hope that that framework will be improved upon. Maybe some sort of adjustments to see accommodation in terms of AI interfacing with human input. I mean, that can help reduce that fear that a lot of people have. But then we are going to pen the conversation here. Liborous Oshoma, lawyer and public affairs analyst. It was nice talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us on the show.